Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on enterprise class DNS security. We have with us Jon Oltsik, Senior Principal Analyst and Shikupa, and we will be talking about how DNS can be that first line of defense and can be an easy, fast, and scalable way to do security. Jon will talk about some of his research that he's done recently around the security aspects and DNS to alleviate some of the challenges that he's been seeing. And then at the latter half of the presentation, I will talk about some best practices when it comes to implementing DNS-based security. Jon, it's all yours.
Thanks, everyone, and I agree. Welcome. I'm going to talk about enterprise class DNS security, and before I do, I have to start with a bit of an editorial. DNS is a core service. It's sort of the glue of the internet. It not only connects users and their browsers to websites, but it's required for email. It's required for applications. It's at the heart of the transition to the cloud, SaaS, IaaS, PaaS. In spite of that, it's still underappreciated. It's still somewhat insecure and really take it for granted in many cases. And I don't understand this, so I'm happy to speak about enterprise class DNS security. I'm happy to talk about the importance of DNS in security, and certainly Infoblox will supplement what I say. So that's my editorial comment to start my presentation. If you would move on to my next slide, please. The agenda that I'll talk about today and really kind of summarizes my feeling and why we need to look at DNS security. And we'll start with the current state of cybersecurity operations and analytics. So let's look at how we deal with threat prevention, detection, and response today, and why a lot of what we're doing today is ineffective and inefficient. And that will kind of cascade into why DNS security is a step in the right direction. I'll look at changes in progress, so kind of if we're not able to do what we need to do today, what changes are we making, and are those effective? The increasing role of DNS in cybersecurity strategy, I'll talk about some of the benefits there. And again, this is sort of my passion in why I'm speaking today. And then I'll look at what makes up an enterprise class DNS security service. What are the considerations that organizations should have as they look toward enterprise class DNS? And then the bigger truth is my summary and conclusion, and then I'll turn it over to Infoblox. So if we go to the next slide, let's start with a level set of some security operations objectives. And this is from some research we did in 2017. We surveyed about 350 cybersecurity professionals working at enterprise organizations, enterprise being defined as 1,000 employees or more. So what were their top objectives? Well, 34%, number one, said they wanted to improve their ability to detect, contain, and remediate advanced attacks and insider threats. So this is all about reducing dwell time. And according to the Verizon DBIR, dwell time is about 200 to 226 days. So bad guys are on our networks. We want to find them. Well, we want to prevent them being on our networks, but we want to find them and get them off our networks as quickly as possible. 29% said they wanted to improve their ability to discover, prioritize, and remediate software vulnerabilities. I've been in cybersecurity for 15 years. We've known about vulnerability scanning and vulnerability management that whole time, but it's still a big problem. There are lots of vulnerabilities. We don't know how to prioritize what to do, and so that's still a major objective. And then 29% said they wanted to improve the operationalization of behavioral intelligence. Behavioral intelligence here is being able to look at security across a specific user and what endpoint that user is using. and what behavior that endpoint is exhibiting and what network systems they're connecting to, and being able to look across that whole chain of events to detect anomalies and prevent malicious activity. So the obvious question is, well, how are we doing across those objectives? So if we go to the next slide, unfortunately, the answer is we're not doing very well. So the question here would be to choose one of these statements that best reflects your organization. And you can see the 27% in the blue bar say the cybersecurity analytics and operations is significantly more difficult than it was 2 years ago. And another 49% say the cybersecurity analytics and operations is somewhat more difficult than it was 2 years ago. So 72% believe things are more difficult than 2 years ago. This is the nature of what we do. Cybersecurity is always getting more difficult. But that's a subjective perspective on my account. The obvious question to this 72% is, why do you believe that? And if we go on to the next slide, here are the top reasons that people said. So the number one reason, 26%, said the threat landscape is evolving and changing so rapidly, making it difficult to keep up with trends we need to understand for security analytics and operations. So the bad guys are moving quickly. We're too busy to keep up with our training or monitoring them. This is the essence of asymmetric warfare. The bad guys are able to outmaneuver us. 19% said the volume of security alarms has increased. This is the cacophony of security alerts and noise, and somehow we have to sort through that. We're not doing a very effective job. 18% said we have gaps in our security monitoring tools. Basically, they're blind spots, so we don't have the full picture, and actually DNS security can help us bridge that gap. And then 18% said there's more network traffic on our networks. Again, this isn't going to change. We're going to have more traffic. We're going to have more devices, more applications. A lot of that traffic is encrypted, so we need better ways to understand the metadata and be able to crack those packets and be able to see what's going on. So we need different strategies. If we go on to the next slide, this is some further challenges. This is from a research report I did with ISSA, which is the Information Systems Security Association, 11,000 global cybersecurity professionals. So the top challenge, 29% said the cybersecurity staff is understaffed for the size of my organization. This goes back to the cybersecurity skills shortage. ESG research says 51% of organizations have a problematic shortage here. It's not getting any better. 28% said my organization depends on too many manual processes and manual and/or informal processes for cybersecurity. Cybersecurity was built on manual processes. It was built on kind of heroic efforts by cybersecurity analysts. And while that's a good thing, it doesn't scale. And with the skill shortage, when your cybersecurity hero walks out the door, gets another job, gets a 40% bump in compensation, you're starting over. So that doesn't work, again, for scale. And then 24% say business managers don't understand and or support an appropriate level of cybersecurity. So the thought that cybersecurity is a boardroom issue, which is often communicated now, that's true. But unfortunately, too many boardrooms don't really understand cybersecurity, support it, promote it in their culture. So there's still a gap there. If we go on to the next slide, what's the outcome of this type of cybersecurity oversight of some of the challenges we talked about, of some of the issues? It's a constant stream of cybersecurity incidents and breaches. So just a little bit of data. I'm speaking to the choir here, or preaching to the choir. So I don't have to really dwell on this, but there were 612 publicly disclosed breaches in 2017, exposing 1.9 billion records. If you don't know of this privacyrights.org, that's a great website to see these statistics. You're able to query these statistics, but that's my source here. The biggie was Equifax, 145 million records exposed. And just looking but at the time I did this presentation, based on the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse, same website, there were 207 breaches so far in 2018, exposing 263 million records. Now, that number is increased as of today with the disclosure of 92 million records exposed from the MyHeritage website. They were found on a private server, and we're looking at probably the first major breach that will be guided by GDPR. So stay tuned. We'll see what happens there. There's an increase in targeted attacks. We know that 80 to 90% of all malware is unique, meaning it is designed to attack a single endpoint. So the ability of some of the antivirus vendors to monitor and manage this is really difficult. And of course, there's an increase in data exfiltration. So these are data breaches more so than incidents. Really, the authors of these are cyber criminals and nation states. And so data security has become a new perimeter. And protecting data has to be tantamount in any cybersecurity strategy. I should also say that one of the things about DNS security that I find, once again, underserved is that DNS is often used as an exfiltration vector. I know Infoblox has done a lot of research on this, but it's very common that DNS is used to exfiltrate data. And DNS traffic is not inspected by firewalls. It's not inspected by IDSs and IPSs. So this is basically an open exit for critical data to be exfiltrated. Again, one of the reasons why I'm passionate about this. Ransomware, not as big in 2018 as 2017, but certainly big in healthcare and state, local, and education markets. Has impacted school districts, police, local police provinces in my home state of Massachusetts, so I'm sensitive to it. If we go on to the next slide, here's some more data from our ISSA research. I'll summarize this again to get to the meat of the presentation, but what this says is 53% of those we surveyed, these are really experienced cybersecurity professionals, say that their company has experienced some type of security incident and or breach over the last 2 years. And I'll call your attention to the right of this slide that 34% said they don't know or prefer not to say. Cybersecurity professionals are pretty private, so I'm not surprised that they prefer not to say. It's part of the culture. But it's safe to assume they've probably experienced at least an incident, maybe a breach. So this data is a little bit skewed. If we go on to the next slide, again, this audience is probably very knowledgeable about this, but I think getting some numbers on paper is important. So what's the result? What was the result of these security breaches that I talked about? 35% said lost productivity, and that can be business productivity as well as IT productivity and security productivity. And then 33% said that these types of incidents led to a significant, or the need for significant IT time or personnel for remediation. Now, put that in the context of the cybersecurity skill shortage and just a general IT skill shortage, you're taking resources away from other critical matters. And then 28% said that these incidents led to the disruption of a business process. CISOs are paid to minimize or mitigate business risk, not just IT risk, not just technical risk. So there's a lot at stake here with these breaches, and I think, again, looking at some of the numbers, this is pretty alarming. To go to the next slide, I tend to use this slide as a kind of a tipping point slide. So although there is some speculation about the attribution of this quote, it is purported that Albert Einstein said doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. That's what we've done. We've added security tools incrementally, adding to complexity, adding to manual processes. We can't do this anymore. It doesn't scale. It's ineffective. It's inefficient. So we need a new strategy. If you go to the next slide, some of the things that people are doing, we know this based on our research. Number one, they're increasing budgets. So 33% of those we surveyed are increasing their security analytics and operations budget, or spending in this case, significantly. And another 48%, I can't really read my own slide here. The font is really small. I think it says 46, are increasing their budgets somewhat. Okay, let's look at this. This is good news. So that means that business people are willing to fund cybersecurity projects. It means that they recognize the importance of cybersecurity to the business. But are we spending that money effectively, or are we throwing good money after bad? We haven't measured that very effectively in the past, and the money is not infinite. We have to do a better job there. So ROI is a very big or important aspect to how we spend in the future. If we go on to the next slide, another thing we see people doing is they're increasing the amount of data, security data they collect. So in this case, at the far left, 28% of those we surveyed said they collect substantially more data today to support cybersecurity analytics and operations than they did 2 years ago. And 49% say they collect somewhat more data for security operations. Now the thought here is good. Let's collect more data. Let's analyze that data. Let's make decisions based on that data. And somewhere in that data, the truth lies. So if we do a good job there, we'll advance the cause. The problem is this is terabytes, if not petabytes of data. So how do you find the needles in the haystack when the data is just running over you? And I can tell you from my experience that a lot of organizations are telling me they are buried in security data and they really don't know how to get out of this. So it's important that we consider what data we collect, process, analyze, and act upon. Let's go to the next slide. I've presented a pretty bleak picture of where we are, and there's clearly some recognition of that and some advancement in the cause. But there's still confusion. There's still a lot of good money being thrown after bad. So DNS for cybersecurity. Okay, this is an opportunity to get the most bang for the bucks because DNS is a core infrastructure, and DNS is used for exfiltration. So how can you use DNS to your advantage? Well, one is for advanced prevention. Now, what's advanced prevention? More organizations are trying to decrease the size of the attack surface. They want to spend money on technologies that help them block more of malicious behavior so they can focus on the remaining critical mass. So advanced prevention in the DNS context is about blocking malicious activity at the network layer. And it depends upon really strong cyber threat intelligence, so it's important to look at your vendors and make sure they have that, that they're sharing data, that they provide for policy management, but this is really about blocking the access to bad IP addresses or bad domains or bad URLs. That's all done at the DNS level. Well, what about threat detection? So not everything is going to be known, so what about threat detection? Well, DNS can look at the protocols. DNS can apply machine learning rules to look for bad behavior. Experienced DNS security vendors can look for patterns that they know indicates bad behavior. And that can, again, be used to get to the root cause of a problem faster and get to blocking a problem faster. It's also important to note that the bad guys use DNS quite prodigiously. So they've been conducting DDoS attacks. They've been doing cache poisoning for years. And then when Conficker came about, which I believe was in the 2010 timeframe, they started using domain-generating algorithms to really fool the technology or fool the security controls and make it really difficult to be able to block any kind of connection when there are just so many different domains being generated. So it's really important to understand that behavior and have the threat prevention and detection capabilities to address it. And then orchestrated response, DNS can share indicators of compromise, indicators of attacks with security controls, like firewalls and IDSs, to trigger new rules, and fine-tune policies based on what the adversaries are doing, their TTPs, their tactics, techniques, and procedures. So DNS should be a really important part of a security strategy. But as we look at DNS, how do you determine an enterprise-class DNS security provider? Well, if we go to the next slide, these are the considerations that I think are really important. So number one, an enterprise-class secure DNS service should be able to do real-time blocking of malicious IPs, domains, URLs, etc. So DNS services should have lots of sensors. Endpoints are sensors. On-premise DNS servers can be sensors. They need cloud-based analytics to analyze and process all the data. They need researchers who understand DNS malicious behavior and DNS knowledge and experience. An enterprise-class secure DNS service should have behavior analytics for advanced prevention and detection. This is to supplement reputation lists. And again, this is understanding malicious DNS behavior, having machine learning algorithms that can spot anomalies, and give administrators really very accurate alerts on what's happening. A hybrid architecture, very important. In a big headquarters, you'd want DNS security built into the network as a proxy for the activity that that land-based users are using to get out to the internet. Also, email and application connectivity. You want that blocking, that gateway functionality. But more and more users are remote, and so you need a cloud-based product to also protect those cloud or those remote users, regardless of the device they use. And the key is to have, as I mentioned here, central management across a hybrid deployment. And you want role-based access controls and policy management so that you can employ specific policies for your European operations versus your North American operations. GDPR certainly exacerbates that need. You want tight integration with the security infrastructure, as I mentioned, firewalls and endpoint protection to enforce rules, but also SIM to share intelligence with and provide context for retrospective analysis. And then a good enterprise-class secure DNS service will provide the best cyber threat intelligence. So really strong insights on adversary behavior. There's something called, DNS provides passive DNS services, which records all DNS activity. That's a treasure trove of being able to look at adversary behavior, pinpoint command and control or C2 servers, look at malware distribution networks. And if you know that, then you can start to look at connections and predict when a new domain comes online, whether it could be malicious or not, depending on a whole bunch of criteria. That's all embedded in cyber threat intelligence and provides for really, really good analytics for your SOC team, your threat analyst team, threat hunters. Very good enterprise class value there. So if we go on to the next slide, the bigger truth, it's my final slide. Cybersecurity operations plans are not working. That was my Albert Einstein reference. We have to do something differently because adding incremental controls, it just doesn't scale. Manual processes don't scale, and they're ineffective. And the bad guys know this, and they are able to circumvent what we do. CISOs need a holistic strategy and portfolio management for cybersecurity, which includes advanced prevention, so high ROI controls that can decrease the attack surfaces, and strong and simple threat detection and response. We need alerts to tell us what to do, not give us another rabbit hole to go down. DNS can play a starring role. I think I've really hammered home that point. And then enterprise-class DNS security can provide for advanced prevention, can support a hybrid architecture, offer central management across a hybrid architecture, cyber threat intelligence that gives us that telemetry and insight to do a better job for risk management, and then integration into the existing infrastructure. So thanks very much for participating. I will stick around for Q&A. Let me turn it over to the Infoblox team.
Thank you, Jon. Thank you so much for that insight. And as Jon mentioned, right, DNS is something that is so easy, it's so powerful, DNS security to implement. And we will take a look in the next few minutes, kind of what are some of the things you can do in terms of best practices, and how can you use DNS, DHCP, and IPAM to improve the security in your organization. So let's take the first point, right? DNS is ubiquitous in organizations, right? All the networks have DNS. Without DNS, networks don't function. And the other point to note here is DNS is there in the network all the time. It's onto the endpoints. So it can become that ubiquitous control point in the network, providing visibility, stopping malicious activity at the DNS level. And also, there's a lot of rich network and device inventory that DNS provides. It provides auditory. It provides historical information on where the devices are going to the internet, where the users are going to the internet, and it's there. That data is there, and that data can be used for audit trail, for compliance, going on in the network, right? And we talk about DNS. Do that. About that in the coming slides. And, there's a lot of analytics that you can do on DNS queries that are going out that actually reveal many zero-day threats that your threat intelligence feeds won't be able to catch. So when you use threat intel feeds, it's basically a list of bad destinations, URLs, domains on the internet that have already been known to be bad. They've been classified as bad. But what if some malicious activity is going to a destination that we don't know yet whether it's bad or not? It could be a new infrastructure that's been set up by attackers, and it's not been classified as bad. So those type of zero-day attacks are really hard to detect unless you do analytics on the DNS queries that are going out to the internet in real time. So when you talk about DNS security, and Jon mentioned the hybrid approach, and that's one of the best ways to do security is to have a hybrid DNS security model where you have on-premises appliances with DNS firewalling capability, with this analytics capability, but also complement that with a cloud-based SaaS solution to protect your users and devices that are not always within the corporate network. You could have employees who are in Starbucks, who are working from home. They're not always within the corporate network. So how do you protect those devices? By having a cloud-based DNS security solution, you can definitely do that. And also remote offices, branch offices. Typically, remote offices, branch offices have small IT staff. They have smaller footprints. They don't have space to put a lot of infrastructure in those locations. So the best way to do security there is obviously a cloud-based DNS security as well. So with this DNS security hybrid, you can get protection against malware, including ransomware, phishing, etc. And bear in mind, 90% of malware, once it's breached the perimeter, uses DNS to call its command and control site. So DNS is that fast, easy, scalable way to detect these malicious activities. You could do data exfiltration. I talked about this earlier using analytics. Content categorization is another thing you could apply at the DNS level as opposed to doing it at a web gateway level, for example. So you can block DNS requests to certain types of content. So let's say it's social media. So let's say a company has a policy where you don't want your employees going to social media during office hours. You could do that. Adult content, things like that. So anything that's out of compliance with the company policy, you can set that DNS queries don't go to those destinations. So again, applying content categorization and policy at the DNS level is a scalable and efficient way to do it, as opposed to doing it at, say, a web gateway level, which is a much more expensive solution. The other thing to think about here is threat intelligence. So we talked about using threat intelligence feeds in your DNS security solution, but the more efficient way to do that is to leverage threat intelligence, not just in DNS security, but also all the other security tools that you may have, like your next-gen firewalls, your IDS, or your SIEMs, and work off of the same threat aggregated and curated threat intel. So there you are avoiding conflicts, you're making your threat intel operations more efficient. And John mentioned this earlier as well, that having that unified hybrid reporting and management, so you're working off of one dashboard to manage your on-premises security and your cloud-based security, and you get detailed visibility. So one of the things, if you have on-premises infrastructure, you can get a lot more contextual information about the infected device. There is a lot of data and context that DNS and DHCP provide, and we'll take a look at what that is a little later. So when it comes to detecting these threats, I talked about reputation, and behavior. So using a combination of reputation, signature, and behavior is really going to give you that protection for not just known threats, but zero-day threats as well, right? Reputation is all about threat intel feeds, knowing the bad destinations, using the threat intel in your security solution. Signature-based, you can detect standard DNS tunneling, for example, iodine or things like that. They have specific signatures they're usually off-the-shelf tools, right? And you can detect those using signatures without having a lot of overhead. And then behavioral analytics is definitely recommended for detecting those zero-day threats. John talked about machine learning. So using a behavioral analytics on DNS queries that improves over time its detection capabilities. And then you can also block it at the DNS. So again, a multi-pronged approach is highly recommended. And then when it comes to getting context around those infected devices, your DNS, DHCP, and IPAM provides a lot of data. So with DHCP data, you can actually correlate disparate events, right? IP addresses. Generally, all devices that are connected have IP addresses, and you can figure out, and the DHCP servers are responsible for allocating those IP addresses. So it helps you triage to a certain extent on what devices are making these bad connections. You can also identify the scope of the breach, the criticality of the asset, right? So with DHCP fingerprinting, you will know if it's a laptop or if it's a PC. With IP address data and metadata, you will know whether that infected device is a production system that's running critical applications, or maybe it's somebody's laptop that went to a malicious site once, right? You definitely want to address a critical server that's going to bad destinations several thousand times a minute. You want to know that, and you want to address that threat first before you address some of the lower priority threats, right? So understanding the criticality and the scope so that you can plan your incident response. DNS and DHCP and IPAM data can help you do that, right? I think Jon mentioned the passive DNS data. Again, that's a gold mine of information. You can understand the scope of the attacker's malicious infrastructure. You can link various events, and this is really important in really improving threat intelligence that you can use. So where do you use all this data? Right? What more can you do with the event detect with DNS? One use case, you can send that information that, okay, this device is infected because it's making this bad DNS communication. You can send that information along with the identifying information about that endpoint to a vulnerability scanner, for example. Let's say you're using Rapid7 or Tenable or any other vulnerability scanner, and you want to set out policy saying whenever, when DNS Security Solution detects something bad, you can set it up so that it goes and scans the device, the particular device, in real time. So that sort of automatic remediation or automatic response to clean up that device or scan that device, you can enable that using a security solution like a DNS security solution that integrates seamlessly with vulnerability scanners. Same thing with network access control. Let's say you want to set a policy that says every time a new device joins the network, I am not going to allow it until I scan it, right? So working with network access control and vulnerability scanner, you can do that, right? You can with the IPAM solution, you can tell when a new device joins the network, and then you can trigger or you can send that information to a network access control solution, and that will block it from joining the network until a vulnerability scanner scans it. So there's a lot of these interconnected use cases that really automate a lot of these processes so that you don't have to do those things manually, and you're now improving the security posture of the organization. You're doing these things that really reduce the risk, right? So you don't want a rogue device joining the network and doing something bad, and then disappearing from the network and not even knowing about it because you were between two scan windows, right? You were not scanning at that particular point in time. So that's really important, and you can do a lot of those things with ecosystem integration. I talked about threat intel earlier on. So, leveraging a platform that aggregates threat intelligence from multiple sources is key, because no one threat intel provider is going to have all the information about all the bad destinations out there, right, about all the bad infrastructure or malicious infrastructure. So, making sure that you can aggregate that information from multiple partners, multiple vendors. Government data is a critical source of information for threat intelligence. So having one platform that aggregates that information, and you definitely want a solution that is, that checks for false positives. You want something that's curated and not just randomly put together, cobbled together, right? So obviously you want to use something like that and leverage that aggregated and curated threat intel in various parts of your security infrastructure. Work off of that same source of truth. Use it in your DNS security. Use it in your next-gen firewalls. Use it in your email security or your web proxy, right? Using a platform that supports those different file formats so that you can use it in any of those infrastructure elements is key, because now you're working off of that same source of truth, and you're going to avoid conflicts, and you're actually improving the overall capability of the security infrastructure to detect these cyber attacks. So just to give you an idea of where a DNS solution or DDI solution would sit in the network, right? For example, the Infoblox, this shows an Infoblox grid. So you have the DNS inside the network. It's close to the endpoint. So you see the internal clients at the bottom sending DNS requests to the Infoblox grid. And you can also do a lot in terms of device discovery with the IPAM solution. You know when a new device joins the network. You can go to all different parts of the network to identify everything that's IP connected, right? So you have that holistic visibility across the extended infrastructure. And you obviously want to use a platform that supports your cloud deployment. Let's say you are using a private cloud deployment, or maybe you're also doing hybrid cloud. Maybe you have some workloads in Amazon, some workloads in Azure, whatever it is, right? You want to make sure that your DDI platform extends seamlessly to your cloud deployment, because you will definitely want to automate DNS and IPAM in your cloud environments for VMs. But also you want security in your cloud environments as well. So making sure that you extend the DNS security there is critical as well. And then as you see here, all the data that is coming out of the DNS, DHCP, and IPAM infrastructure is now being sent to your security ecosystem. You send the data to SIEM, vulnerability scanners. We talked about those use cases, and endpoint security. So just by where the DDI infrastructure sits, it sees a lot of traffic, it sees a lot of these interactions, and that can really bring you that visibility to the rest of the infrastructure. So just in summary, as Jon highlighted earlier as well, DNS is a fast, easy, and scalable way to do security, right? It is ubiquitous, it's cost-effective, and it's fast. So, a malware, once it enters the network, at some point, it will do it sooner than later. So, the DNS security damage. The other thing with cloud-based DNS security is, let's say you have an employee working in a startup, he goes to a malicious website, or he's going to a news website which has some malicious ads. He clicks on them by mistake, and now his laptop is infected. Monday morning, he brings it into the network. He is now within the firewall. He's now behind the firewall, and he's infected device into the network. So at that point, when malware starts to make, to spread or communicate to its command and control site, a DNS security solution is going to detect that immediately. Versus, because like a next-gen firewall, he's already behind it, and the next-gen firewall is at the perimeter. So by the time the next-gen firewall detects it, because DNS request has already gone out and it's coming back, the response is coming back. So already there's been a scope for data breach or data exfiltration via DNS, because the Palo or next-gen firewall is not going to detect that. So, there are really, really important use cases where DNS can play a big part, and that was one of them. Again, the data that you get from the DNS infrastructure is a gold mine. Right? It's there. If you're already using some sort of DNS in your networks today, it's there. Just leverage that data. So make sure that you use that data in your incident response. DNS is important and a common data source. We talked about that. And then obviously all organizations have DNS, so you just need to tap into that gold mine of data. So with that, I think we can open it up for Q&A. Let's see what's coming down the pipe. All right, so there's a question about DNS being used for data exfiltration. Did you mean that the sensitive data is embedded in DNS queries? Yeah, absolutely, right. So what we've seen happen is, let's say an infected laptop has gotten access to some sensitive information, let's say somebody's medical records or something like that. We've seen cases where that data is broken up into chunks, it is encrypted, and then it is attached to DNS queries or embedded in the DNS queries that are being sent out to the internet. On the other side, and it's going to a destination that is controlled by the attacker. On the other side, the attacker's infrastructure is, or the attacker's DNS server is now logging all this information, and it